Psychomancer's Gambit. The world of Xenoc, once the crossroads of the Necron dynasties within the Maelstrom reach, lay drowned and forgotten. In ages past, it had been buried beneath a shielding ocean, a world entombed in silence to protect its sleeping kings. But the tides that had guarded it for eons were gone, stolen by the wounds of war and the hunger of the void. Without its shroud of water, the planet's great necropolises and pylons stood revealed, their golden crowns tarnished to green, their vast causeways carpeted in ash and salt. Now the world stirred once more. Lightning danced across the storm-racked sky, igniting the horizon as energy crackled through the dolmen gates. The old wounds of the earth reopened, and what had once slept began to move. Within the deepest tombs, the Iron King, Konthek Drakarak, awakened. His dynastic codes, corroded by time, fragmented by decay, still carried one immutable command: to end the war that had once consumed his empire. A war long forgotten by the galaxy, but not by him. From the depths of his necropolis came the sound of motion, metal upon stone, ancient machinery reawakening after uncounted millennia. Silver and bronze forms rose from their chambers, their frames hung with weeds, barnacles, and strands of green algae. The tides had shaped them as much as time. Across the city, the first dolmen gates flickered to life, their portals flaring with spectral light as the Iron King's armies began to march. And far above, watching from the terraces of his fractured citadel, the psychomancer Nekvo-Thren beheld his doom approach. His dwindled legions gathered one last time among the broken pylons of his city, ready to defend a world that neither life nor death had yet claimed. Once more, Xenoc would know the march of war. From the dolmen gates came the sound of thunder, not from the skies above, but from the grinding of the world itself. The vast portals pulsed with sickly green light, their geometries flaring in impossible patterns as the air warped and split. Through them stepped the warriors of the Iron King, legions of silver and bronze, their skeletal forms tarnished by age and the slow rot of the abyss. Fronds of green seaweed and tendrils of algae hung from their frames, dripping brine upon the cracked obsidian streets. Their eyes burned with ancient light, soulless and patient, their tread shaking the drowned city. Ranks formed wordlessly. Across the plaza, the psychomancer's banners flickered to life, his own legions emerging from the broken tombs to stand against their reborn kin. Nekvo-Thren, last of the psychomancers, watched as his dwindled army assembled, once an empire's worth of warriors, now a fraction of a memory. Time had stolen much from him. Circuits corroded, dynastic codes lost, and many of his kind had simply never woken. Yet his surviving lords, though diminished, stood with the poise and arrogance of the living beings they had once been. They met the invaders in the shadow of the pyramids. Green lightning and Gauss fire lanced the gloom. For a moment, it was as it had been in the Golden Age, the Necrontar waging war upon their own, elegance and annihilation in perfect symmetry. But the ages had not been kind to Nekvo-Thren's court. For every warrior that rose, two fell. His cryptex fought with desperate brilliance, their minds fracturing under the strain of systems long decayed. His lords carved radiant paths through the enemy lines, only to be drowned beneath the relentless advance of the Iron King's weed-clad cohorts. Soon the avenues of the necropolis were filled with the sound of metal grinding upon metal, the echo of shattered bodies falling to the obsidian flagstones. The green light of Gauss fire reflected from the half-flooded streets, turning the waters to liquid emerald as corpses sank into their depths. One by one, the psychomancer's outer bastions fell silent. His commands grew shorter, his once fluent mind faltering. Still, he refused to flee. By the time the last of his phalanxes reached the Great Pyramid, the enemy had already filled the plazas below. The wounded and the broken were dragged inside, the outer gates sealed with fields of entropic light. Above them, through the rising smoke and falling rain, the dolmen gates still burned, green suns upon a dying world. And as the Iron King's legions advanced across the city, the shattered forms of Nekvo-Thren's warriors were trampled underfoot, crushed, reclaimed, and absorbed into the tide of bronze and silver that now marched for his throne. Within the Great Pyramid, the attackers advanced in perfect formation. A rank of Necron warriors raised their Gauss weapons and fired as one. The air filled with shrieking green light. The defenders' shield wall ruptured and collapsed, the blocking stones melting into slag that hissed and bubbled against the polished floor. The bronze phalanx marched forward without pause, treading over the shattered remnants of their foes. They stepped through the broken barrier into the passage beyond. Then, a scream. It was not a cry of pain, nor the sound of fear or rage. It was the mindless shriek of something that had lost reason itself. The Necron line faltered. From the shadows, a shape darted, claws flashing, raking through 3 warriors before they could bring weapons to bear. A second creature followed, its bloated hands slicing through living metal like paper. One of the bronze Necrons convulsed, its limbs shaking violently. It dropped its weapon, staggering as the green light of its core flickered erratically. The warriors beside it hesitated, their targeting optics confused by its erratic movement. Then the living metal of its hands began to flow, turning black and oily, reshaping into long, liquid blades. The creature looked down at itself and screamed, a high, shattering sound, before turning those new weapons on its own kind. More horrors poured from the vents and side passages, tearing into the phalanx. The triumphant advance collapsed into chaos. Warriors tried to fall back, but the corridors were already filled with madness and blood. One Necron stopped fighting entirely, standing amid the carnage as its systems overloaded. Its optic lenses flickered. Then it began to scream as well, a dry metallic echo that joined the others until the passage became a tunnel of shrieking sound. Outside, the Necron lords stood silent. The pyramid shook with the distant noise. Even they found the sound unsettling. One turned its gaze toward the assembled ranks waiting at the base of the structure. Without a word, it raised a bronze, imperious hand and ordered the next cohort forward. Deeper within the pyramid, Astropath Aylward slowly withdrew his mind from the Empyrean currents and exhaled through clenched teeth. "Interesting," he murmured. The figure opposite him, Nek Vothren, psychomancer of Xenoc, let out a whistling sound that might have been laughter. He bowed and nodded at once, his movements jerky and discordant, as if his body only partly obeyed his will. "Yes, yes," he rasped. "I thought one of your stature would comprehend. A fellow practitioner of the invisible art. Yes, yes, another of the mindbenders." He drifted closer, his skull-like visage looming until the green glow of his optics filled the blind astropath's face. "You understand, of course?" Aylward tried to move back, but the energy field around him shimmered and held him in place. "You've created a technophage," he said softly. The psychomancer's head twitched, pleased. "Yes, yes, good description. Efficient words." He turned away, his staff clicking against the metallic floor as he strolled around his laboratory. "My race never developed your psyker gene. Before our psychomancer adepts could attempt to graft such potential into our kind, the great biotransference overtook us. The melding of machine and flesh left us in the forms you see today." He gestured with one clawed hand toward the cages and stasis cells lining the chamber. Within them, twisted shapes twitched and glimmered. Necron constructs, half-molten, their living metal rippling like liquid mercury. "We sought to replicate the soul spark," Nek hissed, almost reverently. "To make the mind a weapon, to make terror itself contagious. The result was imperfect." Aylward's voice was steady, though his sightless eyes narrowed. "You've infected your own kind." The psychomancer tilted his head, the servos in his neck grinding faintly. "Infection, replication, such organic words. I prefer assimilation of instability." He leaned closer once more, his voice a dry whisper. "Tell me, Astropath, what is the difference between madness born of the warp and madness born of logic?" Aylward said nothing. His pale hands trembled against the barrier. "Madness caused by the warp," Aylward said quietly, "is a synaptic instability, a confusion between what the retina perceives and what the mind cannot reconcile. The brain refuses to believe what the eye sees. That," he added with a faint, humorless smile, "is why all astropaths are blind." Nek Vothren turned sharply at that, as if only now realizing the human before him truly had no eyes. "How interesting," the psychomancer murmured. "Being non-biological myself, I overlooked the distinction." He turned his gleaming skull toward the other prisoner. "But you are not blind." Seer Sewin, her red hair tied into intricate Dutch knots, gave a short, mirthless laugh. "No, I am a seer. I built a psychic wall in my mind to block the worst effects." Ah, the Necron said softly, drifting toward his workbench. Of course, when one wishes to induce a madness born of logic, one must first understand the difficulties of installing that madness into the host. He picked up a long rod of glassy crystal, tapping it gently against the floor as he spoke. As you may know, my kind are souls encased in living metal. The metal is a form of dermis, a living interface. Alward and Seywin exchanged glances. Neither had known that. You mean, Seywin asked cautiously, these metal men are souls operating armored shells like an Astartes in power armor? Nekvothren inclined his head. Yes, in a sense. So to introduce madness into the soul, I introduce it first into the dermis. The contagion passes from the living metal to the essence within. It is elegant, simple transference of an idea. Aylward's blind face turned slightly toward him. An idea that drives one insane, he said flatly. A mechanical virus designed to infect the living. Seywin's voice dropped, her expression hardening. These Xenos are not living, Astropath. I sense no life in them. Their souls are hollow, echoes. Nekvothren raised both hands in mock serenity. It depends upon your point of view, I suppose. Aylward's lips thinned. It's terrifying, an abomination of the machine spirit. The psychomancer tilted his head, placing a metallic hand to his chin in a gesture disturbingly human. I cannot be blamed for its creation, he said lightly. At least not the concept. That belonged to another. He turned his glowing eyes toward Seywin. Ere Onwine, he said softly. She was a seer like you, probably a relation. So this Ere Onwine was a seer of Nitwortha? Seywin asked, voice trembling slightly. My people worked alongside you. Nekvothren bobbed his head in that unnervingly stilted way. Oh yes, quite. Back then they were a Commonwealth world. Interesting people. So full of potential. Shame you appear to have de-evolved so much. But who am I, a Necron lord, to judge? He gestured upward. Dust rained down from the ceiling as a heavy impact shook the pyramid above. Have you seen this place? Outside, the screaming of the transformed souls drew closer, an unending chorus of madness echoing through the ancient stone. The psychomancer worked faster now. Once your technomancer and his companions arrived through the dolmen gate, I assumed the Iron King had awakened and that they were Commonwealth emissaries come to request aid. He shuffled through the objects on his desk, carefully selecting several rods of green liquid light and slotting them into a crystalline device. His voice never faltered. I sent a team to make contact with Ere Eonwine's forces, or whoever took her place after the centuries of your slumber. None of my warriors returned. He fitted the final rod into place, holding the completed apparatus aloft. The device pulsed faintly, veins of green light crawling across its surface. I had hoped to re-establish communication with your Commonwealth, he continued. But since you are now servants of an Imperium of man, I see little point in that. And now the forces of Konthek Drak-Arak press their assault. I was unprepared. Drastic measures are required. Seywin pressed against the barrier field. You're going to kill us? The psychomancer's skull turned toward her. Why on Xenos would I do that? From the doorway, silver and chrome warriors appeared, their armor corroded with barnacles and strands of seaweed. Their weapons rose in perfect unison. Nekvothren didn't turn. He simply raised the tube-shaped device behind him and fired. A jet of glowing fluid burst forth, splashing over the intruders. Their bodies convulsed, shrieking in metallic agony as their living metal boiled and fused together. In seconds, the corridor was filled with a heaving mass of bronze and silver, solidifying into a single grotesque sculpture of melting forms. A second wave of kelp-covered warriors strode over the shattered remains of the first. Psychomancer Nekvothren actually looked surprised. The Xenos Lord fumbled briefly with the tubes on his gauntlet console, glancing at flickering runes with what could only be described as confusion. Then came the sound, a rising whine, the unmistakable buildup of a power field at full charge. Before the invaders could reorient, a massive hammer swept into view. Hearthguard Cinnabil struck like a falling meteor. The first three constructs vanished in an explosion of bronze shards and corroded vertebrae. The fourth was driven bodily into the wall by Cinnabil's storm shield, its ribcage crushed to paste under the sheer force of the impact. Cinnabil stepped through the debris cloud, his hammer humming, his storm bolter already venting smoke from the barrage he'd fired. Behind him, the metallic skeleton pinned to the wall slowly slid downward before collapsing into a heap of shattered necrodermis. Cinnabil inclined his head. My apology for my tardiness. No apology needed, said Nekvo-Thren, calmly inserting a luminous energy core into the weapon in his hand. I had not expected that many intruders. I must have lost more guards in the upper halls than I realized. Cinnabil strode forward and knelt beside a writhing Necron warrior. Its torso half melted, its limbs fused into a glistening green puddle. It was still attempting to drag itself free. He crushed its skull with a precise downward strike, then stood and brushed alloy dust from his gauntlet. That is not the case at all, he said. The Xeno, he caught himself. The King of Iron's warriors have opened another entrance on level 2. Nekvo-Thren went still, processing. Ah, yes, that would be the upper treasury crypt entrance. I thought it was walled up long ago. They must have breached it. He tapped a rune. I will send scarabs. No need, Cinnabil said, tapping his hammer against his greave. I collapsed the roof lintel. They won't be coming that way again. Only then did he look toward the 2 human prisoners, the astropath and the seer, still suspended in a restraint field at the edge of the chamber. He gestured with his hammer. You planning to keep those 2 in the restraint field much longer? It would be impolite, the psychomancer said, deactivating the containment fields. Saywin and Aylward stepped free of their restraints, just as another warrior lurched through the doorway. Half its body dripped molten metal, but it still raised its Gauss weapon and fired. One of the fallen warriors, its torso half molten, had somehow reactivated. Its Gauss weapon snapped up, optics blazing green. Cinnabil moved instantly. He thrust his shield forward. The beam struck, and half the storm shield disintegrated, the right side atomized in a burst of emerald fire. Cinnabil felt the shockwave rattle his reinforced bones, but he held firm. The warrior fired a second shot, this one aimed not at Cinnabil, but at the psychomancer. The emerald beam seared toward Nekvo-Thren in a straight, perfect line. The green blast engulfed Saywin. She threw herself between the beam and Aylward, psychic wards flaring around her for a heartbeat before collapsing. Her robes and flesh vaporized, torn apart at the atomic level. She fell without a sound. Nekvo-Thren snatched a blade from his workbench and hurled it. The weapon buried itself in the attacker's skull, splitting it clean in 2. The construct toppled and melted into the rest of the fused dead. The Necron Lord looked down at Saywin's remains, then at the blind astropath. My condolences, he said, his voice as flat as static. Cinnabil let out a curse as having let the Xenos get a shot off. He strode to the door and looked upwards. The passage was empty but for the fallen. However, the green glow of Gauss weapons lit the top of the passage. More coming, he said. Time is something we no longer have in abundance. Nekvo-Thren nodded to the Hearthguard. I believe it is of my own failing, not yours. My warriors are committed but lacking in numbers. The King of Iron's forces are too numerous, and as you intimate, a time element is an issue. He crossed to his desk and lifted a round object, a sphere of obsidian, its core swirling with trapped smoke and faint, shifting light. Now, he said, turning his unblinking gaze toward Aylward, I need you to do something for me. Nekvo-Thren lifted the small crystalline sphere, its lattice shimmering with internal green fire. Your psycho-adepts can imprint images and experience into a thought, he said, turning the device slowly in his long, tapered fingers. A vision, yes? The astropath shifted uneasily, hands clasped together. Yes, in a simple sense, he admitted. We can transmit impression and emotion, but it is a psychic vision. Hard to explain to a non-psyker. True, the psychomancer murmured. But in the age when my realm was whole, we used these devices to accomplish much the same. They possess the singular advantage of being entirely incomprehensible to my kin, making them an excellent tool for communication without fear of interception or even recognition. The astropath frowned. But your race is non-psychic blanks. How is that possible? This shouldn't be compatible with... Nekvo-Thren tilted his head, the motion smooth and eerily graceful. A limitation of perspective, young psyker. Blank to the immaterium, yes, but not blind to information. There are more ways to transmit a thought than by using the warp. Cinnabil folded his arms, looming behind them, hammer pointed toward the door. Speak plainly, Xenos. We have no time for riddles. The psychomancer ignored the insult with practiced ease. This device, he continued, lifting the sphere between two slender claws, does not employ psychic resonance. It impresses patterns directly upon the perceptual cortex using low-frequency quantum imprinting. A message not in thought, but in structure. A map of experience mimicked by the mind. The astropath's eyes widened. You mean direct neural entrainment? But without the warp, that is impossible. Impossible? Nek-Vo-Thren repeated, sounding genuinely amused. For your species, perhaps. For mine, it was merely an art form. The sphere pulsed once, softly, like a heartbeat inside a machine. What a human perceives as a psychic transmission, my people can achieve by artificially modulating gravitic and dimensional frequencies to mimic the effects of thought projection, said Nek-Vo-Thren. He extended the obsidian sphere toward the astropath. Alward took the sphere carefully. It was unexpectedly heavy, as if the object contained more than simple mass. As his fingers brushed the etched surface, something slid open in his mind like a hinge. He inhaled sharply. Then the world fell inward. Not the chaotic plunge of warp scrying, not the swirl of emotion and color that came with touching another mind. This descent was ordered, structured, artificial. He felt his body vanish, leaving his consciousness standing in a strange metaphorical chamber, a vast hall lined with shelves stretching away into geometric infinity. Each shelf held objects, perfectly arranged like a scholar's archive. A six-armed Xenos creature rendered in perfect miniature, every joint and carapace plate exact. A rotating planet, first blue and green and alive, then barren, cracked, desiccated as if aeons had passed in a breath. Two Necron figures, one wrought from dull iron, one from gleaming brass, frozen in a posture of cold defiance. Countless other constructs, each humming with significance. Aylward realized that every item was a complete memory, stored in the device with perfect fidelity. Not impressions, not emotions. Truth. He reached toward a miniature of a crowned Necron lord, and as his fingers brushed the air above it, a flood of detail filled his mind. Battles, dynasties, treaties older than human civilization. The rise and fall of an empire beneath an ocean. The precision was astonishing. Not psychic, not warp-born, but crafted, engineered with a will beyond mortal art. Aylward gasped, "By the throne, this is extraordinary." He turned in the impossibly sharp-edged room, awe creeping into his voice. This is perfection, a mind reduced to pure form, a library of thoughts without the warp's corruption. I have never experienced anything like this. It is genius. Behind him, though sound did not work the same way here, he felt the echo of Nek-Vo-Thren's presence, distant but observing. Your kind wield vision through chaos, the psychomancer's voice murmured, resonant and metallic. My kind once wielded vision through craftsmanship. Where you embrace storm, we embrace order. Aylward turned back to the shelves, breath unsteady. The warp is untamed, raw. This is clarity, a mind turned into an encyclopedia. His voice shook with something between fear and reverence. It is astonishing. The psychomancer's tone almost brightened. Ere Aeonwine called them crystal balls, he added, voice oddly jovial though his skull face betrayed no expression. Cinnabil lifted a gauntleted hand to the side of his helm, vox runes flickering across his vision. He listened for a heartbeat, then turned toward the corridor. The green glow was brighter now, pulsing against the walls like a heartbeat of cold metal. He looked back into the chamber. "The 10th captain is here," he said, voice steady despite the rising tremor of distant Gauss fire. He paused, tilting his head as another signal cut through the static. "And we have company from above." At that instant, a hidden panel irised open in the wall. 4 tall Necron warriors stepped out, securing the doorway with their phase blades raised over the congealed remains of their fallen kin. Behind them entered Heorwulf and his retinue. Sigabield moved at once to kneel beside Seywin's body, while Fear and Garspec followed, weapons drawn, the others spreading to cover the entrance. Harrogith was the first through the door, leading the Void Armsmen into the chamber. They took firing positions flanking the entry Cinnabil had been guarding. Ordmare paused only long enough to adjust his aim. F-Wump. A rocket screamed up the passage, the explosion rumbling overhead. The one-armed Brineblade took position beside the doorway, nodding once to Cinnabil, who stepped back from his lone guard post. Kethar von Tual had positioned himself beside the psychomancer, issuing a rapid-fire report in pitch-shifted Binharic, so shrill only Torhern seemed able to hear it, his mechadendrites twitching in response. Cinnabil grunted. "So," he said, glancing at the psychic orb on the table, "we've got a magic crystal ball and a Voidsman strike team. What now?" Sigibild lifted the ident card he'd taken from the seer's corpse. He tucked it into a heavy pocket on his coat. "Captain Hiorawolf has gone ahead, securing the lower catacombs. We move to the overlooks around the Eisenstein-Rossan Bridge Plaza. Once we're in position," he nodded toward the Necron officers, "it's up to our new allies. These guards will escort you to the nearest egress point," Nekvo-Thren said, gesturing to the Silver Warriors. "I can operate the Dolmen Gate from here. Once my forces clear the path, you will go." He turned back to his desk, long metal fingers adjusting the tubes and sigil rods. "I have already discussed with Kethar a plan of attack against the King of Iron, but first, you must pass through the Dolmen pathways. After that," he lifted a small crystalline case from the desk, "you will deliver this device to his presence. It is a technophage formula." Cinnabil frowned. "Why can't we just blow him up?" "Worked for the others." The psychomancer gave a weary metallic sigh. "Because he would simply transfer into another suitable host form. But if his host is infected with the technophage, the contagion will corrupt his essence, what you might call a soul or a machine spirit." Elfstan folded his arms, watching with narrowed eyes. "I see a problem." The Necron Lord paused. Elfstan continued. "Your Dolmen gates, our Eisenstein-Rossan bridges, when our men fell through one, the pressure differential should have pulped them. It didn't. The gate altered their molecular state to buffer atmospheric shock." He stepped closer. "So, would it also purge infection? Otherwise, you'd have sent a missile through and ended this war days ago." Nekvo-Thren froze, then slowly inclined his head. "Yes, it would." He lifted a long rectangular container of translucent green stone. A thin line of light leaked from the seam along its top. With ritual precision, he inserted 3 etched rods filled with shimmering blue-green fluid, each one inscribed with microscopic circuitry of living light. When the lid closed, the box thrummed, resonant and cold. "What you say is true," the psychomancer admitted. "Still, deliver this to the feet of the Iron King and your world will be free of him." Elfstan shook his head. "It'll be neutralized the moment we step through the bridge." The psychomancer stared down at the box. "I believe I have sufficient shielding to—" "We don't operate on belief," Elfstan snapped. "It's our world. We need certainty." Nekvo-Thren's hands tightened around the artifact. "The only alternative is infecting a construct directly, but none of my warriors would survive approaching the king. We lack your speed and your persistence." "I'd call it sheer bloody-mindedness," Elfstan muttered, "but I get your point." Then he grinned. "But I do have a solution." The Necron Lord looked up, green eyes brightening. "I am awaiting enlightenment." Elfstan took the container from his hands. "You know, I was Iron Hands once, and every man here, every revenant, is cut from the same cloth." He tapped his augmetic arm. "We all share a common upgrade." His grin widened. "I think I can deliver your technophage with the efficiency we both require." For a moment, the psychomancer simply stared. Then, slowly, he bowed. "If we meet again, biological, it will mean I have failed. Then my dynasty is lost." Elfstan saluted him with the box. "Then I'll make sure we don't meet again."